to, well, I can't obviously see, you can see us, but great to have you with us on this fine Thursday. You're likely to be here because, you know, a little bit like Sodexo, you're trying to navigate what is probably the greatest supply chain challenge the industry and governments have faced in all of our lifetimes. So no pressure at all to the panelists for coming up with some kind of solution for you all. We're all conscious that, you know, whatever all of us do, it does affect our carbon footprints and directly impact progress made to mitigate the effects of the climate crisis. Before I introduce this fine quartet of individuals, I should really introduce myself for those that are maybe not rugby fans or question of sport fans. I am a very proud Sodexo ambassador, have been for about 13 years. Varying types of roles with Sodexo, whether it be health and wellbeing ambassador through to staff engagement, some business development, and all via the regional leadership committee that I've sat on for the last 13 years. Away from that, I suppose highlights of my career, and I've been bullied into saying this, was going on Strictly Come Dancing and finished second. You know, not one of my greatest moments, but unfortunately people still talk about it. And being on Celebrity MasterChef, which I won, which I think had probably something to do with the fact that I ended up having a job with Sodexo. But all joking aside, yes, being on the BBC, Question of Sport, and ultimately the reason why all of these things happened for me was because I was part of an amazing team, an England rugby team that won the World Cup back in 2003. So there is a connection. There is not just sort of some random ex rugby pro hosting this. I actually went down to Watts Hill Farm with Aoife Wycherley, who you see is one of the panelists, and Joe Cottingham, who works with Ed Gray, just to sort of strengthen my grasp of the current pressures on the food supply chain. You know, it really demonstrated that relationship between supplier and customer and the strain put on it by COVID, obviously Ukraine, rising cost pressures. There's plenty to there's plenty to add in there. I think what stuck out for me, a couple of things really from the visit, was the importance of big suppliers like Sodexo working with small businesses, as they tend to have that agility to ensure the resilience in the supply chain. And secondly, why it's essential that we minimise food waste from farm to fork. You know, food waste is not only a contributor to more carbon emissions and climate change, as we all know, but also worsens the supply shortages. So stopping this is, yeah, I guess it's mission critical. So without further ado, without going through too many statistics, because I know that there will be plenty of them throughout the next hour, and we do need to be done at 1:30. So not only am I hosting all of this, but I'm some kind of timekeeper. It's like playing a game of rugby. You've got to know where the score is, what time it is it half time, who's had the substitutions, what you talk. I mean, it's all taking me flooding back to playing sport here. But yeah, the idea behind this is really, you know, all of us, how can we help build that resilience in the supply chain and help sustainably deliver food continuously? So for that discussion, I certainly can't be doing that on my own, as you would expect. It is time to meet these fine four individuals. Let's let them do their own introductions so we can get a feel for Aoife, Ed, Jen and David. Aoife, if I can start with you to introduce yourself and your role. Fire away.
Thanks, Matt. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Aoife Wycherley. I lead the food procurement and the supply chain teams for Sodexo across the UK and Ireland. Sodexo, as many of you will know, are world leaders in catering, facilities and property services. Food procurement and supply chain have been incredibly lively activities since 2020, really consistently, but I certainly wouldn't have it any other way. In our region, the UK and Ireland, which is the third largest, we spend over 200 million on food. We employ 30,000 colleagues, and we work in a very varied part of the business, everything from sporting, following the theme of Matt, obviously, sporting venues where we're venue partners through Sodexo Live, to hospitals, to defence sites, to prisons, to our corporate clients in corporate services. So quite varied, but quite exciting.
Thanks, Eva. I'm not sure whether there is any particular order in this, but on my screen next is Ed. So I'm going to go to Ed.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ed Gray. So I'm a director of Watts Farms. Watts Farms is a third generation family business, essentially a farming and fresh produce business supplying both retailers, i.e. supermarkets, as well as food service. I head up the food service division, so I specifically look after customers like Sodexo, as well as other contract catering, restaurant, hotel sort of customers. Current supplier of Sodexo and a strategic partner of Sodexo for a number of years now, and actively work with Sodexo on a lot of topics we're going to discuss today.
Thanks, Ed. Jen?
Hi, I'm Jen Emerton. I'm Head of Account Management at WRAP, so I look after the team who in turn look after all of our business relationships, including Sodexo. I can see a few of our WRAP business partners on the call, but for those that don't know us, WRAP is a global NGO tackling the causes of climate change. And we tend to work in the areas where there's a market or system-wide failure that no one intervention can solve. And I think our food system is a key example of that, as we need a lot of different players to work collectively together. So yeah, looking forward to our discussion on helping the supply chains to solve some of those problems collectively.
Appreciate that, Jen. And yeah, David, follow that.
Thanks, Matt. And hi to those on the call. I'm David Edwards. I direct the food strategy at WWF UK, but I also sit on the leadership team of WWF's Global Food Practice. Now, over the last 4 years, WWF, who I hope you understand is a big global conservation organisation, have actually taken a strategic pivot towards focusing on food as the major driver of all nature loss and a pivotal sector for the climate challenge. In fact, WWF see the planet's climate, nature and nutritional crisis as a linked triple challenge. Our work on food takes a systems approach. We look at the need to change food production, but also to accelerate a shift in diets and to address the 40% of food that is wasted. My role enables me to look at this issue both through the lens of the needs and opportunities here in the UK, but also about how what we're shooting for here intersects with the global policy and corporate action agenda. We have a long-standing global strategic partnership with Sodexo, which enables us to do just that. So it's a real delight to be able to bring some of that insight here today. Thanks much.
Great stuff, David. And just picking up on your last sentence there, insight. Really, really important that this discussion webinar gives insight to the 70 odd people that are already on the call. But of course, it should be a two-way thing. There is time to have a Q&A at the end. I'll make sure that we'll get 5 or 10 minutes at the end. But please throw some questions during the session. If you go to the bottom of the screen, I'm just going to go through it myself. Yeah, the 3 dots. It pops up. It's pretty simple. It says Q&A. Get into there and ask your questions, and either I'll keep an eye on them and throw them in at the time, or maybe we'll turn them on, turn them around at the end. But let's try and keep it interactive in some way, shape, or form. We do have we're going for about 12 minutes for each question, even though this probably already looks like it hasn't been rehearsed. It has been rehearsed. So we hopefully we are going to get across that it does look like we know what we're doing. I'm only joking. It has been very well rehearsed and well prepped. We're going to talk about the supply chain crisis, food waste, net zero, supply chain diversification, around those topics that are obviously very hot topics right now. So without further ado, let's crack on, shall we? Eva, I'm going to come to you first, and if we can maybe just have that general perspective on the supply chain crisis right now and how it's impacting you, Sodexo.
Where do you start? You know, we've used the word unprecedented so many times over recent years. You know, my time in procurement. But when I talk to peers at the moment, what we're experiencing right now truly is unprecedented. It's not just one crisis; it's many. And I think if there's one certainty that we have, it's that there's more to come. We have not seen the end of it, and that is a bit nerve-wracking, really, in our industry. But we have to look on the positive side of it. A few months ago, we did a research of 275 of the supply chain heads responsible for food procurement within the UK's largest food suppliers, and 86% told us that the pandemic or the recent challenges that they'd experienced have left long-term damage on their supply chain that they've yet to manage. That's 86%. So we really are all in the same boat, but I'm not sure that gives us much comfort either. But it's as a result of the amount of uncertainty that we're experiencing. Yes, we've had COVID, right? And that's driven raw material shortages. It's driven logistic delays. Demand forecasting has been challenging. Consumer trends have changed. We've labour shortages across the supply chain, everything from HGV drivers to fruit and veg pickers to frontline staff, for the likes of restaurants or cleaners or our own business. Then Russia invaded Ukraine. Then we had hyperinflation. We're now experiencing drought. And even just in the last few days, we have seen the uncertainty around inflation in the UK. So as I say, if there's one certainty I do have, is that there's more uncertainty to come. If I take it closer to home for the likes of Sodexo, I've talked there about the challenges, the uncertainty within the supply chain. But how we are delivering food now is very different to how we were delivering food 2 years ago. Partly because of consumer trends. But then, you read the media reports and they talk about how quality standards are reducing as a result of the hyperinflation we're facing. For example, there was reports of some outlets taking off or reducing meat content on the plate. But one thing that I'm really comfortable to say at Sodexo is that we're using the uncertainty to double down on our sustainable standards. We're going to up the ante, not dilute them, so that we can convert the challenge into an opportunity for us. And a key part of all of that is our partnerships with our suppliers. And I'm expecting you'll hear me use the word partnership a lot throughout this conversation, because I do feel that is a key part to supply chain resilience as well, and hence why Ed referenced the long-term strategic partnership that we've had with the likes of Watts, because our partnerships are one of our keys to success to get us through the uncertainty.
Yeah, it'd be you're good at some stage. I'm sure we'll get into the sort of the how and how the partnerships work, Eva. Ed, what's the crisis looking from your perspective? Where do we start?
Where do we start? I mean, for me personally, the word crisis now is the wrong word, because a crisis is kind of like a short-term problem that then resolves itself. We've got ongoing rolling crises, if you like, crisis after crisis after crisis. And it almost feels now that, each crisis is almost becoming normality to a degree. So obviously, for us in supply chain, the first one everyone knows about and is commonplace is the inflationary pressures. Everyone knows the reasons behind it. For us personally, fuel, electricity, packaging, labor, fertilizers, just we have the supply chain have a lot of cost of inputs, so every single one of those is going up. You then have the current currency crash and increased interest rates also adding fuel to this inflationary crisis, because going into the winter seasons, everything's traded in euros. A lot of products, fresh produce and food products traded in dollar. That's a horrific crisis coming there on certain products. I mean, there was a talk last night about bananas, for example. It's crazy what's going to happen if the dollar remains that low. Interest rates, a lot of suppliers are financed and rely on financing. So interest rate changes have a direct impact of costs as well. Particularly for me, I think one of the biggest problems is labour pressures. I know it's a key theme across every business, but for us, it really does affect us quite badly. If we can't get the staff, we can't get the goods out to the customers, or harvest it in the fields, let's say, or pick it or deliver it. And we are really struggling to get staff. There's a big change, and that really has come about from COVID. I think it's hard work in the supply chain. It's hard work in the kitchens. These are not easy jobs. So that's definitely a struggle to find staff. Also, I think we're struggling with in the supply chains. There's a lot of pressure on priorities that are being pulled down. Let's say, so our organic sales are down 40% in the last 3 months. We're not a huge organic producer, but we do have about 20-30 acres of organic lands, and we're seeing those sales literally crash. Some customers, not all, obviously Sodexo is not one of those, but some customers making choices about where they might have been really strong about local produce, seasonal produce, maybe abandoning some of those choices in the current financial times, which is a bit scary and worrying. And really, for me, also climatic pressures. So, farmers always want the perfect season. And I think Matt Joe was telling you it was on the farm back. Perfect season was like a perfect rugby game. It doesn't happen. We want like perfect bit of sunshine, a little bit of rain. Want to start this, and that never happens. So there's never a perfect season in farming. But one thing that's apparent is climatic pressures, like adverse events, are happening every year, whether it's in this country or abroad. So we've got a drought this year. We had a really bad flooding in the beginning of last year. There was snow in Spain, pretty much every year, which these used to be sort of rare events of sort of every sort of 3 to 5 years maybe it would happen. Whereas every year they're happening, and they're happening across different countries. So that is becoming harder to manage. From our perspective, we try and spread the risk, but it's definitely almost you're having to factor that in by presuming there's not going to be a perfect year, there's not going to be a perfect season, and you almost have to factor that in. I definitely agree with Aoife that the only certainty currently is that this uncertainty will continue, and I guess that's how we manage it.
Yeah, I mean, not that I'm sure that we will get into this in too much detail, but the ability to recruit the right type of people and the right type of people that can adapt and have that mentality to adapt because of all of these multiple crises that are out there is yet another thing that is going to differentiate large businesses, suppliers, etc. Jen, where a wrap when it comes to this crisis, what's the perspective, which will probably be quite different to maybe a lot of people on this webinar have experienced?
Yeah, I'd imagine. And so I would say that we can certainly echo Aoife's point about uncertainty and Ed's point about competing priorities. I would say that like in the midst of COVID, when a lot of our business partners teams were furloughed and there was pins put in various initiatives, coming out of that, we really felt this kind of galvanized effort, and it was such a short-lived respite of focus and attention. And I think a lot of businesses are seeing that competing priorities, and we essentially are trying to support them through that. I think what we are seeing is the businesses who have made that big picture link between their sustainability initiatives and their overarching business risk and resilience management, as Sodexo have done, are benefiting from the engagement in these initiatives right from the board level all the way through to customers and investors and employees. And that engagement has really shone through in helping maintain progress, which essentially is key because the issues that we're facing are not going anywhere. And we don't have the I guess, the freedom or the time to put pin in it indefinitely. What I would say, and I think we'll come back onto it in a lot more detail, is the supply chain disruptions have had a massive impact on food waste levels up and down the supply chain. But what we're seeing is spikes and fluctuations at different points in the supply chain and affecting different sectors differently. What we know from our years of experience is that where the food waste manifests is not always the point that it's created. And that's why there's a real focus on getting the whole supply chain together and dealing with issues like this at a systems-wide level, which can help to really build resilience across a whole supply chain. But I suspect we'll come back to food waste and strategies for dealing with it shortly.
Yeah, we certainly will. Jen, you will have your moment in the sun for sure there when it comes to food waste. David, what are the concerns at WWF?
Well, thanks, Matt. And difficult to add. I mean, that's been a great exposition of the challenges, but maybe in terms of framing what we're seeing, if that's helpful. I mean, what we're really seeing is the climate and nature crisis crashing into a political and economic crisis and exposing, I think, to everybody, some of the systemic vulnerabilities within the food system. So yes, we're seeing current issues like I think we're hearing reports of a 20% hit in yield actually from this hot summer across many production systems, and our partners amongst them, Sodexo and Tesco's, are reporting, real worries about empty shelves this winter as the cost of heating greenhouses and such like compounds the issues that we've seen from the cost of fertilizer and the drought issues this summer. But those immediate manifestations of the crisis really point to the deeper challenge, which is that the climate, nature and food system is in effect coming apart at the seams. And the challenge for WWF is that although this is sparking more interest in the need to build resilience, for example, through a transition to more agroecology, there is wariness and challenge about how you get off the high input treadmill without falling flat on your face. And in particular, we're seeing that challenge amplified recently by more uncertainty from the government, rowing back or potentially rowing back on their support for agroecology through ALMS, their reform of public policy and support for agriculture. They seem to be relying upon a status quo, and yes, doubling down on that might get us through the current crisis, it might get us through the next couple of years, but our fear is that it will ensure that we won't get through the next 10 or 20 years. And I was really interested to hear what Aoife was saying about what they're up to, because it feels that the horizons between short-term and long-term sustainability are collapsing. And it's great that stakeholders like Sodexo are beginning to realise that, and the imperative of gripping these issues at their root, really.
I am looking forward to you coming up with a solution for all of that, David, in the 38 minutes that we've got, if that's all right. If you can just rustle something together, that would work perfectly.
We have some ideas.
So let's get into one of those topics that I know you are all sort of itching to talk about. I'm sure it's going to spark up. I know there have already been a couple of questions flashing up on my screen, which is great. Food waste, preventing food waste, the impact of food waste, making the supply chains resilient around food waste. Aoife, where are Sodexo now? Where are they hoping to get to? What's the process? Where is it on the priority?
It's one of our biggest. Food waste has a direct link to supply chain resilience. You can't do one without the other, and both lead into our net zero strategy. And our net zero strategy is a key priority for Sodexo. So there is no compromise for us, and hence why I refer to doubling down on this. If you just think about it logically, and again, this is before, David's referred to the climate challenges clashing with the political challenges. So if I just focus on one side of that discussion for next, it can get quite complex, I think, otherwise. You know, strictly speaking, less food wasted means fewer supply challenges. It's essential, therefore, to reduce our carbon footprint of food production generally, but the entire food supply chain. If you think about it, like, it takes a lot of energy to grow, to transport, and to prepare food. So anything that we can do to impact that, we should be doing. It's all about one step forward. And we all have the ability. Everybody has the ability, both in your own personal life, which I've become significantly more conscious about, but also in our corporate environment, to reduce food waste, which is literally feeding the climate challenges, pardon the pun. When I look at, in preparation for this, some of the strategies that we are taking to try and manage food waste, I realize, talk for a significant amount of time. So I try to focus on 3, the magic number, that are showing variety in the type of things that one could do on those. So firstly, we're using wasteful to tasteful, which is a fruit and veg box delivery. It's a random selection of fruit and veg that would otherwise have been wasted that week. And we're actively promoting that within our business, and seeing a steady increase in those that are interested in having their own impact, but also their clients' impact, to reduce the fruit and veg waste that week. We partner with our suppliers like Watt, so we're becoming significantly more conscious about who we are working with, what the ethics of that company is. And I don't want to steal Ed's thunder, because I'm sure he'll go into some of the hows they are reducing food waste. But certainly we feel that Watts are pushing the boundaries with us, testing us, which is fantastic. We want more of that. And then thinking outside the box, we've partnered with the Bread and Butter Thing, who are a Manchester-based charity who redistribute food. So their mission is to make life more affordable for those on low incomes, to build a stronger sense of community, and also to reduce food waste. So we're talking to them about what categories they need, and then we're partnering them up with our suppliers to help redistribute their food waste. And that's not just for what they supply Sodexo, it's anything that supplier has that they could share with the Bread and Butter Thing to benefit those in need. If I go back to our research again, right, 80% said that net zero is actually a business priority for them. But I think people are just struggling to actually take that step forward with it. And certainly when we talk with our SMEs, or small to medium enterprises, they simply don't know where to start. And that's why as well, we're trying to be more active in how we engage with suppliers, educate them, share our expertise. But they need our support. They need the support of large organizations and government support, so that they can try and go on this net zero journey to avoid some of the situations that David referred to earlier. If I look again at Sodexo specifically, and you ask me, how much of a priority this is for us. So in 2017, we launched our global sustainability roadmap called Better Tomorrow 2025. And in that, in 2017, when the world looked very different, admittedly, we committed to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions by 34% by 2025. And last year, when we measured it in 2021, we'd hit 38.5%. So we've exceeded our own targets early across our scope 1, 2, and 3. But jeepers, we won't be stopping there, and our commitment continues to try and exceed our own targets. And if I go back to it again, we do see our suppliers as a key part of the strategies that we can use to prevent food waste and deliver a net zero strategy. So if I may, Matt, maybe go to Ed so that he can share some of the actions that you're taking, Ed, to support Sodexo, but also in general across your business.
Echo some of the things that you said. I mean, specifically for us, if I look at food waste, we're a farm business that grows about 100 different crops. So for us, it was a really big problem. And food waste is a huge problem, globally as well as in the UK. About 6-7 years ago, we kind of really had our eyes opened about it. Mainly from a couple of different reasons. We had Jamie Oliver and Jimmy Doherty come to the farm to do a film about it. And we didn't really realise the possibilities of what we can do. And that really helped us actually to open our eyes. And working with food service, opposed to working with retailers, presented a lot of opportunities. So, little things like by doing farm tours with customers and walking them through a field of runner beans where the bottom ones are all bendy on the bottom row, and them saying, well, why are you not picking that? And we're like, well, we won't get, won't be worth the money we get back for it. And them going, well, we'll take it and figure it out. And that's really opened their eyes. So what we do now is we really sell and grade out a lot of the product we would have considered as class 2 or waste. And there's different products in there. There's ones that, throughout the whole season and ones that come and go throughout the seasons. But that's really working with food service customers. And actually now, when we have a product, we've got some juicing apples currently in an orchard that we're thinking, oh, these can't be good for anyone. We get samples out to some of the key customers in the groups, some of the exec chefs in Sodexo, and say, look, what can you do with this? Send you some boxes. Can you make something out of this? And surprisingly, they're all very creative. Like, yeah, definitely can. So for us, it feels like something we've really tackled quite well. We get some stuff made out of it, and we're looking at how we grow a lot of herbs, for example. Herbs is a difficult one because when you have too much, it's actually quite hard to sell a lot of fresh herbs in a week extra, and they can go quite bad quite quickly. So that's a bit of a unique product that's difficult to manage food waste wise. So we're looking at how we convert that into a pesto. Matt picked raspberries when he was down, and they get to people that can make jams and things. So rather than throw it away, can we convert it to something that has a longer life? So I feel that we've done a lot, and I feel that's only really come about from probably the food service part of the areas helping us. But I also feel the retailers are starting to change on it. There's obviously more that can be done, but certain retailers we deal with have widened their specifications on products. So before we grew chilies for a major retailer, anything had a mark or was slightly bent or had a skin blemish would have been rejected, so end up in waste. Whereas now they've widened their specs, we can get a lot more of that product into the bags, and that's really the main aim, because the customers don't really mind, even don't notice, to be honest, some of this stuff. So that's one of the things we've definitely been able to do, and but that's mainly become about from working with food service. Also, you have other companies now, I'm sure people are aware of people like Oddbox and companies like that actually actively have a business out of surplus products. I know the Wasteful Tasteful guys, they're very good at asking farmers and growers, what have you got? What have you got? And that's great to have that extra outlet. So when you do run to a brick wall of not having what can you do with this, you can contact these guys and say, do you want this? Do you want that? That helps. So, and that's definitely part of our, part of getting to net zero. Net zero, I feel that for us is we're on a journey towards. It is very complex in a farming business, especially when you grow 100 different crops, to get your carbon emissions calculated. And we're working with the University of Greenwich to help us a little bit here, because each crop has a different carbon footprint. And what we do on the farm also has a different carbon footprint. So we have grass lays that actually put carbon back into the soil, and that sequesters, but then you have to look at, so it's a bit of a minefield. The distribution side's a bit easier. And so certain projects that we've got some solar projects kicking in, we've got some electric vehicles that are currently on trial. And for us, I would say net zero has gone from probably being a nicety to actually a necessity, because I think you're going to find in the next 6 months to a year, businesses that are not on that journey are going to have their costs dramatically increase. So take energy, for example. We've all got support now currently for the next 6 months, but that's not going to be indefinite. So if you don't invest in solar panels, if you don't invest in reducing your energy cost, in 6 months to a year's time, your cost is going to be higher than those in the supply chain that have invested. So I feel that it's not only a nicety, it's a necessity to remain competitive in the supply chain.
Ed, whilst you were going through that, there was a lot of nodding, David, going on there. Tell us why.
Well, a couple of things really. And first of all, happy International Food Loss and Waste Day. Very appropriate. We should be talking about food loss on this particular day. Hopefully, the profile of this issue will become so great that we'll actually remember that it's that day next year when it comes up. But yeah, as long as we're wasting 40% of the food we produce, we're fighting these fights against climate change with a hand tied behind our back. It's clear that although the people are starting to recognise, and companies are starting to recognise, that the challenge of climate change links to waste because they're getting bad spec products. It's affecting the quality of the production, particularly this year. Very few have started to associate that waste as a major driver of climate change, as a major driver of those emissions that Ed was talking about. And I think that it's important for us to recognise not only is 40% of all food wasted by and large across the globe, a huge amount of that is in on-farm waste, and it is not. I mean, it's great that Ed is talking about all of these interventions which are obviously helping. It's not solving the problem in this country. We've got a report coming out next month, and it's frustrating. I can't give you the headlines, but I can tell you they are alarming. On-farm food waste in this country is still a huge issue, and our intervention in this space, working with our partners, and we hope to be able to do this with Sodexo as well, is to try to drive more transparency and information into that system. At the moment, on-farm food waste is not monitored in the same way as other waste in the supply chain, and we've developed a sort of a roadmap and a tool to help ensure that we can get more transparency into the system. We can understand what is being wasted and why, because again, I think it's important, it's incumbent really on stakeholders to understand that they need to help. They need to help farmers waste less, not just through their business practices, but also through their advocacy for the policy frameworks and others that can help protect farmers, for better forecasting, for procurement, for better contracting. These are the systemic issues that need to be dealt with at the same time as all of this good innovation that Ed has been talking about, which I think is very important and really encouraging, is becoming more mainstream.
What are the actions behind that, Jen? Sort of the overview of what needs to be done.
Yeah, so I've dropped in a couple of mentions to whole system collaboration. So I'll mention just now the Quartile Commitment, which is the voluntary agreement that WRAP runs with targets specifically around greenhouse gas reduction, freshwater stewardship, and critically food waste. So our guiding principle is around target, measure, and act. And I think Ed's point about having, your eyes opened when you start to dig a bit deeper into these things is key. So when we have talked to businesses in the past, Aoife and Ed, I don't know if you would agree with this, but quite a few businesses think that they have minimal food waste, and when prompted would probably guess about the 5% mark, when in fact it can be as high as 50%. And that's at any stage of the supply chain. And I think by focusing in on the measurement piece, you can really tackle the problems that make the biggest difference. And it allows you to have the transparency and visibility of where you can have the biggest impact, rather than an assumption of where it's coming from. So data and transparency is key to making these really good decisions, and also collaborating across different businesses that can have a greater impact together. So I would say we have an example where 90% of the UK's blackcurrant crop is bought by one business, Ribena, and they got a handful of growers together, and through our group measurement approach, identified huge differences in each of the growers' food waste levels and at different stages. And they compared notes, and we sort of guided and supported them through the process, and identified specifically the point of harvest as a key driver of food waste, and really shared learnings across processes and techniques and machinery and infrastructure and all of these different things, and found some really key ways to save on a lot of the crop being left in the field. So there's examples like that that really bring to life the Target, Measure, Act principle, and some of the ways that we can collaborate across the supply chain to really make a huge difference, not just to your food waste volumes, but also to the bottom line, which essentially becomes new profit streams that Ed was talking about.
And can I jump in there, Matt, very quickly, just to pick up on the measurement piece, because I completely agree with Jen and that whole point that data is king, and it's the only way that we can actually make proper plans. Jeekers, it makes sense. And so we've invested in technology, Waste Watch by LeanPath, to measure our food waste in our sites. Now, I appreciate there's still a significant amount more to do across the supply chain, but it's within our control, our sites. So we've worked with our clients to deploy this technology to over 200 of our sites, and we're now measuring our food waste. So we're starting to collect that data. We have reduced, I think it's something like 280 tons of food waste in the last 12 months, which is great. But it's also that active step forward, and it's about us working with our clients to share that journey, to share that progress on the benefits that we can have to the food waste journey, but then overarching to net zero, really. So tracking gets a big thumbs up from us.
Okay, I've just had a look at a couple of questions that I want to make sure that we've got time for after we've asked this sort of last question from Arnab, funnily enough, about data. So we'll come back onto that. And also, Philip Crew, I know you've asked a question there about some alternatives around how to use the food waste around feed for other animals, etc. So that might be something that we can come back to when we've got a bit of time at the end. Keep the questions coming along, please do. So obviously a passionate discussion, conversation around the crisis of today of food waste, but understandably organizations will want to be looking at what changes they can sort of make right now in the supply chains in order that they can continue to effectively deliver food. So let's go on to sort of that third theme around diversification in the supply chain, and what are some of these strategies that organizations can go through right now and change right now, Aoife?
Okay, so when we look at the research that I referenced at the start, 36% of respondents said that their plan is to use more small to medium enterprises to support their supply chain resilience challenges. And at Sodexo, we've been doing this for a long time. Over 70% of our suppliers are SMEs, and that's our direct relationship. So I know that when I count our indirect, the percentage increases significantly. And 44% of our spend is with SMEs and VCSEs as well. We're in a continuous improvement program, really, about how we can support the diversification within our supply chain. 10 years ago, we started supply chain inclusion programs, which was about opening the doors of Sodexo to smaller businesses so that they could create a warm environment for them to learn about who we are, how our decisions are made, routes to market, and we'd introduce them to some of our distribution partners, and basically give them a good cop, bad cop, the good cop experience of understanding how some of these large organizations operate. Because look, we can be complex. We all know that. And then they ended up with a meet the buyer with the relevant category manager, so they were guaranteed that, which again we know can be hard to get a buyer meeting at times. And we're still working with some of the suppliers that we met 10 years ago. And I should say actually that not all of them started working with us, because some of them realized actually that the likes of contract catering wasn't right for them, and I'm happy to support suppliers on that journey as well. If I look at what we're doing even more recently, when we talk to suppliers about net zero as an example, and just how they're going to manage reduced packaging or food waste to try and support that, some of them are just struggling with what they are going to do. So we created a mentoring program, because we have loads of expertise within Sodexo. I get that, and we need to share that. So we speak to some of our small businesses, say, what are the areas that you want to know more about, that you're struggling with? And then we match them with a subject matter expert within Sodexo and put them through a mentoring program so that we can share our expertise, and that the SME can get something specific for them on their journey with us. We tend to find, and again, we use what's so much through the supply disruption to support us, that smaller businesses have more agile decision-making processes. They, by the nature of the business, can be quicker to respond to ask to turn things around. And Ed has referenced it. Many also tend to source more locally as well, which obviously supports the overall topic of food waste as well.
Sorry about that. Ed, there seems to be a nice running theme here from going to Aoife to Ed and through.
Unintentionally, actually.
Yeah, I mean, what you said about SMEs being more agile, I think over the last few years, I mean, it's like an analogy of having a big ship and turning it is quite slow. If you're in a big ship and if you're a small little boat, you can turn quite quickly. I think that's been the key to success in SMEs, and we've been able to help Sodexo in times of need. There's been specific examples where they haven't had deliveries to schools, to hospitals for 4 or 5 days in a row. And we were able to bail them out and get in there. And don't get me wrong, it's not easy. Like family business, everyone's been working. My 75-year-old dad was working. My brother-in-law, my wife, my nieces. It's everyone that can drive a vehicle has pretty much been helping. But in those times, we can and we do that, and that's the agility of SMEs. I think definitely what you've said about sourcing local, I think is really key. If you want to avoid the supply chain disruption, if you want to diversify your way around it, whatever supply chain you've got, you need to work closely with suppliers, especially now more than ever. But more security supply and also seasonal advice. Like if you have that relationship and you have that seasonal change, you're going to get through this, and you're going to minimize your increased cost, because it's in a changing global world. Actually, seasonal produce and sourcing seasonal is always going to be the best strategy, not just from a nutritional and flavor and freshness, but from a pricing perspective and a food security perspective as well. So I'd recommend that to anyone, any of your supply chains, to work close suppliers. With the food waste issue, find out what their issues are. Every supplier is going to have different food waste issues. Can you help them out? Can you work together? Can you synergistically, find something that's going to make a better relationship? And I put another comment here that it's quite nice to be able to trial things with customers. Not everything will work, but now's the time to try different stuff. We've looked at also service levels. Do you need to deliver to those smaller sites 6 times a week? Is it actually imperative? Does the chef that's jumping up and down every day needing a delivery at 7:30 need it actually, or can he have 4, or he or she have 4 deliveries a week? So now's time to challenge some of those cost bets, because they also have a cost implication as well as a carbon footprint implication as well. So yeah, work closer than ever with the supply chain. I think that's the key to getting through this.
David, do you feel you've got a say an independent an overview of this dynamic of case in point here, a Sodexo, Watts Hill Farm, large corporate SME. Do you feel that those communication channels are could be better, or should be broadened, or are good enough, or are indeed as obviously as vital as these guys are saying? Do you see enough of it?
I mean, I confess here, Matt, I'm not the expert. I mean, my hunch is that it's getting better and better, and my appreciation of what technology is doing to drive the sorts of information and communication that might be required for a sort of big to many small supplier type situation is a major fillip to this. But I was actually going to add a bit of a curveball. I was quite glad to hear Ed mentioning seasonal products. The idea that a diverse and local supply chain will be bolstered by this idea of seasonal products. But I think we should also look at the wider diversification within menus. The foods that we think are commonplace perhaps should be less commonplace, because those foods tend to be based on, in one form or another, a route to market for industrial commodity monocultures. So industrial fishing, industrial animal production, the building blocks of processed foods. They're all of these commodity monocultures, which are in actual fact dependent on fossil fuels, dependent on fertilizer. They undermine our soil health. They're not long-term, non-sustainable. So at the sort of meta level, looking down, what does diversification mean? We can't get away from the need to diversify the diet, diversify the menu. And essentially that means, moving to a wider range of more vegetable-based products. So it's not that, we're not saying meat is bad, but we are saying that a transition to, let's say, better meat would be important. Our work with the retail sector actually is trying to drive transparency into their protein offer. And we've got the 5 major UK retailers, and I think that's like a benchmark for the entire, the diet of the UK, to commit to a 50-50 protein split by 2030. I mean, they have no idea how they're going to get there, but they do appreciate that is the nature of the challenge. And with that in mind, what we've seen from Sodexo, the commitments they've made on shifting, I think it's a 30-odd% reduction by, don't want to get this wrong, but they are definitely doing a major moderation of meat on their menus. We've been also working with Sodexo actually in their school offer, trialing the development of new offers based upon more fundamentally healthy and more fundamentally sustainable vegetable products, a selection of products we call the Future 50. And we were engaged with Sodexo in their Finer Diner initiative at the university level, but also at the level of schools more recently. So yeah, I just want to put that out there, that is a fundamental part of this diverse, more resilient supply chain and business model. It is a more diverse and less, let's say, high impact diet offer, menu offer.
Jen, what have you got further examples of that? I know it's always tricky to go the fourth of the 4 when you're all going to be sort of nodding along thinking, yeah, they're all very valid points. So without sort of putting you on the spot, are there things from RAP's perspective that you feel are good examples to share?
Yeah, I would say coming back to the focus on SMEs and supporting, I think what we've found is because particularly in hospitality and food service, the sheer volume of SMEs make up such a large proportion of the sector. So for us, we're focusing on the people aspect as much as the process and the technology when we come to things like tackling food waste. So, for example, we created our Guardians of Grub campaign because what we want to get out is that the people who are actually visibly seeing the food waste have the skills and knowledge that they need to be able to identify it and measure it. And I think that's where Sodexo and other big players, we've recently done a project with Hellmann's, who have great reach out into hospitality businesses, who can surface things like our cost saving skills course and other information that reach a much broader SME audience and can engage them and give them the support and the information that they need because they have those direct links, as Aoife was saying, those partnerships that can help to support such a huge range of SME businesses in this sector, because our food sector would be nothing without the SMEs that are actually supplying and serving the food to end users. So yes, fully supportive of that partnership approach and in helping the people within those businesses to upskill their teams as well.
Thanks, Jen. Just check that I'm not on mute. No, that's good. I've just had a quick look at the clock in the corner of my screen, and we've got 7 minutes to go. And from all accounts, at 1:30, we are all disappearing, whether we like it or not. So probably an apt time to get through some of the questions that have been posed previously and today. David, I'm going to come to you. I know you're probably now dreading it, that I'm going to throw something on you, so apologies. But I was just sort of intrigued by this question from Philip Kruger on the Varley reports. Have you read that question, David? Have you read that one? No, I'll go through it. Varley reports that there are calls in Europe to lift the ban on food waste as feed for pigs. Japan and South Korea are commonly using food waste as feedstuff for pigs, which results in a much lower carbon footprint. What is the sort of general view, especially since 1.8 million hectares of global agricultural land can be saved if food waste were used for food. A very informed individual, Philip. Thank you very much for that question.
Yes, I'm aware of this. This is feedback. Give this the really pithy title of the pig idea. So this is in a consequence, I think it was to foot in mouth, that the government banned the use of food waste as animal feeds. And you're quite right. You know, there are ways and means to make this perfectly safe, and the fact that this is working well in South Korea and other places shows that that is the case. This is the sort of opportunity that Brexit should be giving us. You know, the fact that the EU is reconsidering it fills me with hope, because we should have got there way before them. And it's really rather a letdown that we haven't. And yeah, this is a great idea. And there are many different ways actually to improve the fundamental efficiency of our system through recycling waste. Another one, Matt, that we've written a report on recently is the use of insect feed for animals. Yeah, and as can be a way to process food waste in actual fact, but to displace some of the problems of that monocultured feed system that I was talking about, there's a huge potential there, I think, to offset around 30% of our feed imports through the use of insect feed. So yes, this is all good, but I imagine Jen squirming in her chair, because we've got to be faithful to the food loss hierarchy here, Matt. You know, this is great for dealing with food waste when it occurs, but my God, our priority is to reduce food waste at source. Yeah, and I'm really frustrated I can't give you these figures, but let's say a more, just under a third, let's say, of food waste in this country is actually on farm. So let's be sure that that is a clear focus for us as well as dealing with all these things. It's all hands to the pump. It's throughout the hierarchy that we need to have work. But I do think we need to be sure that we don't displace any attention from that urgent problem.
Are you squirming there, Jen?
I mean, I would say generally I agree with David. I think, like, obviously WRAP, very true to the hierarchy. We should first and foremost prevent the waste, and food that is edible and edible for people should be eaten by people, and that will solve a huge chunk of our problem. But animal feed is a valid step on the food waste hierarchy, and it should be.
There was also, I've been asked this question generally when I was talking internally about hosting this panel, and other than saying, what on earth are you doing hosting that, they were asking me some proper questions as well, but there was a general theme of what are the specialists, and bearing in mind not just yourselves on this panel, but the 70-80 people that have been listening to this, all at the top of their game, all absolutely right in the thick of this supply chain crisis. With the fact that we've got 3 minutes left, what's the silver bullet? What's your version of what can be done right now that is maybe not going to be discussed today, but to take away and think about in our own little worlds and teams? What's that takeaway silver bullet? Let's go with Ed to start with. Sorry, mate, I've thrown it at you.
There's one silver bullet. For me, to be honest with you, the biggest volume happens in retail. I'm honest, I would like the government to focus a bit more on retail. The decisions made affect farmers' waste and farming in general far more than anything else. And give you a little example, I won't name names or anything, but we recently lost a large contract over 3 pence a packet of chilies that are UK grown, lost to Moroccan chilies all year round over price. If there was, let's say, an import tariff on Moroccan chilies, that wouldn't be lost, and that would mean that we would grow more UK chilies. There needs to be some sort of, in the world of increasing costs, there needs to be some focus on, we need to increase domestic production. And if the biggest volume players in the market are not incentivized to do that, apart from off their own back, and there are lots of retailers who are doing it and they're very good at doing it and they want to do more UK, there are other retailers who are solely focused on price at the expense of anything else sometimes, to be honest with you. So for me, it would be focus on the retailers, please.
Okay, right. Well, we've got about 20 seconds, Aoife. What have you got to throw into 20 seconds?
I can talk for days. Don't give me 20 seconds. It's just
I'm
start.
putting the pressure on you.
Yeah, just start. You know, I've said already, measurement, tracking is crucial, but just take one step forward, just start.
Okay, well, I'm sorry to it was always going to happen, wasn't it? We were always going to rush to get through. The sort of couple of notes that I've made around working towards a zero waste world. In doing so, we're also going to be making progress against net zero targets. And also supply chain diversification is key to supply chain resilience. Working with small businesses can help the supply chain to innovate and be more nimble in response to challenges. They're the sorts of themes and notes that I've been making. I know we're going to run out of time any second. I very quickly want to thank these fine 4 people in Eva, Ed, Jen and David for not only taking the time out today, but going through all the preparation for today. Thanks very much for joining us, and also to all of you for coming along. And hopefully you found it an informative session. If you do want to pick up any more bits and pieces around Sodexo and its supply chain, get on LinkedIn. Eva's always doing videos and conferences and webinars and full of information. And we look forward to meeting in the flesh maybe one day. But thanks to the panel, and thank you all for joining.